In the quiet heart of the Yucatan Peninsula, where the air was thick with the scent of flowering cacao and the calls of unseen birds echoed through the green canopy, there lived a people in harmony with the sun, the stars, and the sacred land beneath their feet. This was the world of the ancient Maya, a civilization shaped by cycles of time, whispered prophecies, and stone cities nestled in the jungle's breath. Long ago, before clocks or calendars as we know them, the Maya watched the skies. Their priests, cloaked in jade and feathers, studied the movements of the sun, the moon, Venus. They carved these celestial rhythms into stone, not merely as records, but as songs etched in glyphs, as prayers woven into time itself. They believed the world had been created not once, but many times, each era rising and falling like the tides. The current world, the fourth creation, began when the gods remade the earth after long cycles of destruction and rebirth. This new world was supported by the sacred ceiba tree, its roots reaching into the underworld, its branches holding up the heavens. In the village of Yaxkinha, where cool rivers coiled like silver serpents through the forest, young Itzel would often sit beside her grandmother, Ixchel, as the elder woman wove stories into cotton cloth. The humming of insects formed a gentle background as Ixchel spoke of gods with jaguar faces, of maize-born twins who played ball in the underworld and tricked the lords of death. "The world listens," Ixchel whispered. "Even the trees remember." Itzel would close her eyes and listen too, to the rustling of palm leaves, the distant rhythm of drums from the nearby temple, and the whisper of her people's past carried on the wind. She dreamed of becoming an Ajkuhun, a keeper of sacred knowledge. She imagined herself painting glyphs on bark paper codices, mixing inks from wild berries and soot, carefully tracing the names of kings and stars. At the center of Yaxkinha stood a modest pyramid, its limestone steps softened by moss and time. Offerings of cacao, feathers, and shells were placed at its summit, not out of fear, but reverence. Each act was a thread in the invisible web that tied the people to the gods, to their ancestors, to the very soul of the earth. Each morning began not with alarm, but with light, the golden breath of the sun, known as Kinichahau, seeping through palm-thatched roofs. The villagers rose with the dawn, not rushed, but in rhythm. Farmers walked barefoot to the milpa fields, where maize, the body of the gods, grew tall and green. Children helped grind corn into masa while elders told stories of when the stars first spoke to humankind. They lived not in palaces of marble or gold, but in balance. Their homes were woven from the world around them, clay, reed, and timber, shaped by hands that respected the earth's offerings. Their nights were dark but not silent, filled with the lullaby of frogs, the flutter of bats, and the soft, eternal murmur of the forest. One night, as the full moon rose high over Yaxkinha, casting a silver glow on the jungle floor, Itzel crept out of her home and wandered toward the old observatory, a round stone tower built long ago to track the heavens. There, she looked up at the stars, those ancient messengers, and wondered what stories they would tell her if she learned to listen closely enough. She remembered her grandmother's words, "The Maya don't just tell time. We feel it. We walk with it." As a gentle breeze played with her hair and fireflies danced in the air around her, Itzel whispered back to the night, "Then let me walk with it too." And so began her journey. Not of conquest or empire, but of deep, still knowledge. The kind that grows slowly like roots beneath the earth. The kind that listens more than it speaks. The jungle did not sleep, but it cradled those who did. And as the stars turned overhead, a new page turned in the nightbook of the Maya. Time, to the Maya, was not linear, not a straight road disappearing into the horizon. It was a circle, a cycle, an eternal breath that rose and fell like the tide or the sun. They lived inside time, not outside it. Time was sacred, alive, and it whispered secrets to those who paid close attention. In Yaxkinha, each sunrise was a thread in the great tapestry of the long count. The elders spoke of baktons, katuns, and tons, vast measurements of time that stretched far beyond any single life. Their calendar was not just a way to mark harvests or ceremonies, but a mirror to the universe itself. Itzel sat beside her uncle, Ahau Balam, one of the village timekeepers. He carried a codex in his lap, a folding book made of bark paper coated in lime, its surface painted with deep reds, blacks, and jade greens. His finger moved slowly across the symbols, turtle glyphs, serpent glyphs, the face of the sun god drawn in profile. This, he whispered, pointing to a spiral of glyphs, marks the last solar zenith. The day when the sun stood directly above us. And here, this is when Venus last vanished from the sky, only to be reborn. Itzel's eyes followed the lines as if they were a trail into the sacred. They are more than numbers, she asked softly. Much more, he nodded. Each number, each glyph, is a heartbeat. The gods marked their breath with time, and we live in the rhythm they left behind. Outside, the village buzzed gently with life. A woman ground maize on a metate, the stone grating softly. Nearby, a boy climbed a tree to pluck ripe avocados, his laughter mingling with birdsong. But within the temple courtyard, all was still. This was the place where time was read, not from clocks, but from stars and memory. Every 260 days, the Tsokin calendar completed a sacred cycle. 20 days, each with its own face, its own personality, joined with 13 sacred numbers. These combinations made days that pulsed with meaning. Today was 3 a day of yellow seeds, of abundance, of growing wisdom. Priests and scribes wore colors to match the day's energy. Feathers of Quetzal green and ochre gold rustled as they moved through the temple corridors, their footsteps nearly silent on the warm limestone. Itzel loved the glyphs, they spoke without sound. Some looked like open hands, others like jaguar paws or corn ears. Her favorite was the glyph for Emix, the crocodile, the first day in the sacred count, the great waters from which all life emerged. She traced it now in the dust beside her. Her uncle watched her quietly. "You have a gift, Itzel," he murmured. "Perhaps one day, you will be the one to write the time." She smiled shyly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Do the glyphs ever change?" she asked. "No," he said gently. "But we change when we read them. That's the magic of it." As dusk approached, the shadows in the courtyard lengthened. The air turned cooler, and the scent of copal incense drifted from the temple altar. A fire was lit in the center of the plaza, and villagers gathered with offerings of maize tamales and honey water. This evening, they would honor Chel, goddess of the moon, of weaving, of healing. Itzel sat with her family, watching the flames flicker. Her grandmother began to hum a lullaby in the old tongue, one sung by mothers for generations. Above them, the stars began to peek through the sky's deepening indigo. She looked up and wondered again about the calendars, not just the ones etched in stone, but the one the stars kept. The one written in light and shadow, in sunrise and eclipse. She closed her eyes and imagined herself years from now, her hands steady, her brush fine, her thoughts quiet as she painted time itself onto sacred paper. She would honor the old ways, and carry the voice of the past into the future. And as the jungle rustled around her, as frogs began their nighttime songs and the wind carried whispers through the palms, she felt it again, that slow, steady pulse beneath everything. The jungle held secrets, not only in its rustling leaves and hidden creatures, but in the stone bones that rose from the earth like memories. Among vines and orchids, howler monkeys and parrots, stood the cities of the Maya. Not ruins then, but living places, filled with music, laughter, prayers, and wisdom. The great cities, Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, each had their own soul. Their pyramids touched the sky, built not to reach gods above, but to mirror mountains, the sacred resting places of ancestors and the heart of the cosmos. These structures, made of carved limestone, glowed gold at sunrise and faded to silver under the moon. Itzel had only heard stories of the great cities. Yaxkin Ha was a quiet village, but her heart beat faster whenever travelers passed through, bearing tales of faraway wonders. She listened to them closely as they described temples taller than trees, plazas where kings in jade masks gave speeches, and ball courts where players danced with fate. One trader, a man named Kinum with skin dark as polished wood and arms stacked with bracelets, told her of the city of Tikal. I stood beneath the twin pyramids, he said, voice low and reverent. And when the wind passed through the trees, it sounded like the gods whispering through the leaves. Itzel imagined it, the vast plazas, the painted murals, the smell of incense and flowers, the echo of drums bouncing off temple walls. She imagined walking those wide causeways, her feet brushing ancient dust, her eyes drinking in the glyphs that covered every surface. In the Maya cities, no stone was bare. Walls spoke. Steely, tall stone pillars bore the likenesses of kings, queens, gods, and warriors. Their hands held staffs, maze, or serpents. Each had a story to tell, a date, an offering, a prayer frozen in time. She dreamed of visiting Copan, where the temple steps were carved with glyphs that climbed the entire staircase, a codex made of stone. Or Palenque, where the temple of inscriptions held the resting place of a king beneath layers of silence and time. Every city had its own rulers, divine lords known as Kuhulaja, holy kings who were believed to bridge the worlds. They performed rituals, read the stars, and made sacrifices not to rule with fear, but to maintain balance between heaven, earth, and the underworld. And there were queens too, powerful women like Lady Six Sky and Lady Cobble, whose names echoed through the centuries. Itzel often wondered if she might one day become like them, not a queen in jewels, but a keeper of words, a weaver of knowledge. One evening, as fireflies blinked among the thatch and frogs sang their sleepy songs, her father brought her a gift from a passing merchant, a small piece of limestone carved with the face of a god. Its features were stylized, with swirling patterns and almond eyes. On the back was a single glyph, the symbol for Chuk, the storm god. This came from a temple in Uxmal, he said gently, handing it to her. The man said it was once part of a story wall. Itzel held it as if it were made of feathers, not stone. She turned it over in her hand and felt a strange warmth, not from the rock itself, but from its age, its story, its memory. That night, she dreamed she was walking through a city built in the clouds. The temples shimmered with colors she had never seen. People moved like shadows, and the air was thick with incense and song. In the center stood a pyramid, and at its top, a woman waited, not old, not young, with a brush in her hand and time in her eyes. You are part of the story too, the woman said. Itzel awoke with the dawn, the carved stone still in her hand. She smiled softly to herself and whispered a promise into the morning light. I'll write the cities back into the wind. And far away, beyond the reach of any one dream, the stone cities waited, their hearts still beating beneath vines, their stories resting in silence, ready to be heard again. In the sacred cities of the Maya, nestled between temples and altars, were long, narrow courts. Not for sport alone, but for ceremony, for the reenactment of myths as old as memory. These were the ball courts, where the Maya played the paktapak, a game that echoed the journey between life and death, sun and shadow, creation and sacrifice. The court was shaped like a great knife, flanked by stone walls where carved rings hung high. The ball, made of solid rubber, was heavy, bouncing with surprising force. Players struck it not with hands or feet, but with their hips, thighs, and chests. The rhythm of the game was a kind of music, low thuds, swift scuffs, and the occasional cry of triumph or pain. Itzel had never seen the ballgame played, only heard its name whispered with reverence. In Yaxkin Ha, the court was overgrown, silent, a ruin of moss-covered stone and curling vines. But her grandmother often spoke of the Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Highlands, where the ballgame was born from myth. The hero twins, Ixchel would say, eyes half closed with memory, were the first ballplayers. They played so loudly in the underworld that the lords of death became angry. Itzel loved that story, how the twins, Hunapu and Zbalank, tricked the gods of Zabalba, defeated death, and rose again. Their journey was not one of strength, but cleverness. They transformed, outwitted, sacrificed, and returned. They were more than players, her grandmother whispered. They were rebirth. One afternoon, curious and quiet, Itzel wandered alone to the abandoned ball court. The jungle had crept in, as it always does, vines spilling over the walls, lichen growing between the stones. She stepped carefully through the weeds and sat where once, centuries ago, kings and priests watched players move like lightning beneath the sun. She imagined it now. The roar of the crowd, the beat of drums, the tense silence before the ball was served. Warriors dressed in padded armor, faces painted with jaguar spots or serpent scales, danced and twisted as the ball flew between them. And then, beyond the game itself, came the offering. For in many ceremonies, the end of the match was not just victory or loss, but transformation. Sometimes, captives were sacrificed. Sometimes, it was the winning team who offered themselves, a gift of life returned to the gods in exchange for harmony and renewal. Itzel shivered. It was not cruelty, not to the Maya. It was duty. The greatest honor. Above her, parrots called to each other in the high branches. A spider monkey leapt across the canopy, carefree and quick. The sun sent shafts of light through the leaves, lighting up the old stones like sacred fire. She stood and traced her fingers along the edge of the wall, feeling the grooves worn by time and weather. A small glyph caught her eye, half hidden by moss. She brushed it gently. It showed a player kneeling, the sacred ball hovering beside him, and behind him, a skull masked in feathers. Life and death, always side by side. Back in the village that night, the elders gathered for stories. Around the fire, the old men spoke of how the sun itself played the ball game each day, rising in triumph and sinking in sacrifice. The moon too, chased through the sky, caught and freed again. Everything in the heavens was playing. Itzel sat quietly, cradling the image of the court in her mind. Not a place of games, but of echoes. A space where myths became muscle, and stories moved with sweat and breath. Before bed, she whispered a prayer to the hero twins. Teach me to play wisely. To lose with grace. To win with humility. And to rise again, always. The jungle listened, and in the hush of midnight, a distant drumbeat echoed between the trees, not from human hands, but from memory. The game was still being played, somewhere in the stars. The Maya did not look to the heavens in fear, but in reverence. They saw not chaos above them, but a divine order, a realm where God stirred the wind, brewed the rain, and painted the sun with fire. The sky was not empty. It was alive, full of beings that breathed in clouds and lightning, walked across stars, and spoke through storms. One such god was Chuck, the great storm bringer. He held lightning axes and wore a swirling serpent on his brow. When the dry season lingered too long, it was Chuck they called. When the maize withered in the fields, they danced and burned incense, hoping to stir his mercy from the sky. Itzel first learned of Chuck during the rains. She was very small then, and the thunder frightened her. But her grandmother had held her close and whispered, "That is only Chuck, walking above the clouds. He is not angry. He is working." Now, as the seasons turned once more and clouds began to gather over Yakskin Ha, Itzel sat in the shrine where the statue of Chuck stood. Carved from red stone, eyes bulging, fangs curling, arms raised to strike. Offerings of jade beads and crushed cacao lay at his feet. The priests were preparing for the Chachak ceremony, a calling of the rains. Elders dug a shallow basin in the center of the plaza, filling it with clean water to reflect the sky. Children carried baskets of flowers, yellow marigolds, blue lilies, and white blossoms picked just before dawn. For boys, each representing a cardinal direction, would climb to the temple's summit and pour water toward the earth, mimicking the rain's return. Itzel watched the ceremony in stillness. As the conch shell sounded and the priests chanted in soft, ancient syllables, clouds darkened above them. Lightning flickered along the horizon, and the scent of wet earth rose from the ground even before the first drop fell. When the rain finally came, slow at first, then heavy, the villagers raised their hands in gratitude. The milpa would grow. The rivers would swell. The balance had been restored. But Chuk was not the only god they honored. There was Kinichahau, the sun god, whose face bore warmth and order. Each morning, his rise marked the rebirth of the world. His image was painted on pottery, etched into temples, and woven into the headdresses of kings. There was Nine Chel, goddess of the moon and healing, who watched over women and midwives. Her form was both kind and fierce, often shone with serpent hair, pouring water from a jar that symbolized life. And there was Kawil, the god of lightning and royal lineage, with one leg shaped like a serpent and sparks flowing from his forehead. His presence blessed the birth of rulers and the forging of sacred treaties. The Maya gods were not distant, they were close, intimate, even flawed. Some tricked, others sacrificed. They loved and fought, wept and rejoiced. They reflected the people who worshipped them, complex, vibrant, and alive. That night, after the rain had passed and the frogs sang loudly in celebration, Itzel sat beneath the eaves of her home, sketching a glyph in the dirt. It was her own creation, a combination of rain, fire, and maze. She showed it to her mother, who smiled gently. "Who is this?" she asked. "A god I dreamed of," Itzel whispered. "One who watches over the stories we haven't told yet." Her mother leaned in and kissed her head. "Then keep dreaming. The gods are always listening." Above them, thunder rumbled again, softer this time. Like a closing drumbeat, or a giant's laughter echoing across the sky. And in her sleep, Itzel saw Chuk smiling behind the clouds, and Kinichahau painting tomorrow's dawn with gold. In the quiet halls of the temples, in shaded rooms where the air was still and smelled of ink and bark paper, the Maya scribes worked, the unseen keepers of memory. They were not warriors or kings, but their tools were just as powerful. With fine brushes and steady hands, they wrote the stories that time could not erase. They were called Ajkuhun, those who bore the divine word. Itzel often dreamt of being one. Each time she saw a codex pass through the village, a folding book filled with glyphs and vibrant images, her heart stirred. These were not simple writings. They were sacred maps, filled with signs of the sun's journey, the names of rulers, prophecies, rituals, and histories reaching far beyond the present moment. She sat with her uncle Ahau Balam, who had once trained in the great city of Koba. He owned a few worn codices, protected in clay cases and wrapped in cotton. One afternoon, as the wind played softly through the trees and cicadas hummed nearby, he unwrapped one and laid it gently before her. "See here," he whispered, pointing to the page. "This tells of a king who spoke with the gods in his dreams. Each glyph is a step in that journey." The symbols danced in curves and loops, small portraits of spirits and sounds. Itzel leaned closer, noticing how each mark was precise, balanced between art and language. "Can I learn them?" she asked softly. "With time," he said. "The glyphs are alive. You don't just read them, you listen." The scribes ground pigments from nature, black from charcoal, red from crushed insects, blue from the sacred Maya blue, made with clay and indigo. Their brushes were made from animal hair, shaped to a fine point. Each stroke was deliberate, rhythmic, like a song written in silence. Itzel spent days practicing on clay shards and smooth stones. Her first glyphs were uneven, too wide, too shallow. But she was patient. She listened to the way her uncle spoke each word, the way the stories rose and fell like waves. The Maya believed that to write was to shape reality. The glyph for king was not just a name, it was an invocation. The glyph for rain could be offered in dry times. The glyph for beginning opened ceremonies, while the glyph for death reminded all that endings were sacred too. Each scribe memorized hundreds of symbols. Some stood for days, animals, directions. Others spoke of gods, seasons, wars, births. The beauty of Maya script was that it held sound and meaning together, like poetry made visible. One evening, after a long rain, Itzel brought her practice tablet to the riverbank. The world was quiet except for dripping leaves and distant birds. She drew a single glyph, the symbol for a jaw, ruler, light, sun, balance. She traced it slowly with her finger, feeling the weight of what it meant. Not just power, but responsibility. Not just leadership, but harmony. Behind her, the jungle stirred with the sounds of life settling into night. Somewhere, a jaguar padded through the shadows. Somewhere, another scribe lit a candle and dipped their brush into ink. She looked up at the stars and whispered a vow, that she would one day write the stories of her people. Not for glory, but for memory. For the whisper of tomorrow. That night, she dreamed of paper made from bark and ink made from moonlight. She saw her hands painting a path of glyphs across time, each one glowing softly as it touched the world. Before gold, before stone, before even the stars were fully understood, there was maize. To the Maya, it was not just food, it was the very essence of life. They believed that humans were created from maize dough by the gods, shaped with care, brought to breath with sunlight and rain. In every village, from the great cities to the smallest hamlets hidden beneath the trees, maize grew tall and green. It rose in wide fields called milpas, where men and women worked with patience and rhythm, planting alongside beans and squash, the three sisters, always together. In Yaxkinha, Itzel awoke each morning to the scent of tortillas on the comel, warm and round like little suns. Her mother pressed them by hand, whispering songs passed down by her grandmother, and her grandmother before that. One morning, as the mist lifted from the jungle floor and the dew clung to every leaf, Itzel walked with her father to the fields. The maize stalks rustled in the breeze, tall and golden. Birds fluttered from one plant to the next, searching for insects and seeds. "This is where we come from," her father said softly. "Not from the sky, not from the sea. From here." He knelt beside a stalk and placed his hand on the earth. Maize remembers. The Maya calendar itself was shaped around the growing cycle of maize. There were days for planting, days for first sprout, days for harvesting, and days for giving thanks. Ceremonies were held before every season, with offerings of tamales, drinks of atole, and kernels sprinkled at the roots of young plants. Even the gods had maize in their stories. Hun Hunapu, the father of the hero twins, was known as the maize god. He died and was reborn, just like the seed that falls into the soil only to rise again in green splendor. In her dreams, Itzel often saw the maize god, his face smooth and calm, his headdress high with husks and silk. He would walk through the jungle, his hands brushing the tops of the stalks as if blessing every plant. He did not speak, but the wind around him carried the songs of planting and harvest. That evening, her village gathered for the harvest feast. Long tables were filled with tamales wrapped in banana leaves, thick masa drinks spiced with chili and cacao, and sweet corn cakes made with honey. Elders offered the first bite to the fire, feeding the spirit of the earth. Children danced to flute and drum, wearing maize-colored masks, yellow, white, red, and black, the four sacred colors of corn and of the cardinal directions. Itzel sat near the fire with a fresh tortilla in her hand. She looked at the flames and thought of how every bite was a gift, a thread in the long story of her people. She broke the tortilla in half, offering a piece to the fire just as the elders had done. The flames flickered in thanks. That night, she dreamed of fields that stretched beyond the horizon, golden and endless, under skies where constellations moved like growing vines. In the center stood a temple made of maize, each step a cob of corn, each stone a kernel. Inside, she saw a room filled with codices, and a brush waiting for her hand. When she woke, the air was cool, the sky still dim with the early morning stars. She whispered a soft prayer. Not thrown, not lost. Just returned. The jungle around her remained quiet, but she felt something stir, not fear, not sadness, but connection. As if the earth had accepted her voice. That evening, the moon was high and pale, and the village elders sang songs of the water spirits. Incense drifted toward the heavens, and the people gave thanks for the hidden rivers beneath their feet, the sacred veins of the world. Itzel sat beside her grandmother, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders and whispered, "There is more below than above. But not all of it must be understood. Some things must only be respected." She nodded slowly, and in her sleep that night, she dreamed of water that flowed upward, of glowing roots that reached into the stars, and of voices beneath the surface calling her by name, not with words, but with warmth. And in the depths of the cenotes, where light met shadow and silence held secrets, the spirit of the Maya world pulsed, eternal and still. Beneath the dense forests of the Yucatan, hidden in the folds of limestone and silence, are the sacred waters, the cenotes. Deep, still pools, formed by the collapse of ancient cave ceilings, they are windows into the underworld, to the Maya, places of prayer and passage. Itzel first heard of the cenotes from a wandering elder who visited her village. His skin was lined with sun and time, his eyes deep with memory. He carried a pouch of polished stones and told stories in a voice that drifted like mist. "The cenotes," he said, sitting by the fire, "are the eyes of the gods. When you gaze into them, they gaze back." She listened as he described Xibalba, the Maya underworld, not a place of punishment, but of transformation. A realm of caves and rivers, shadows and silence, where souls journeyed after death to be tested, to be taught. Itzel imagined the sacred pool near her village, where the trees bowed inward and vines draped like curtains. She had passed it many times, but now, she saw it differently, not just as water, but as doorway. One morning, after the rains had passed and the world glowed with renewal, she walked quietly to the edge of the cenote. The water was dark and clear, reflecting the sky with perfect stillness. Birds fluttered overhead, and dragonflies skimmed the surface. She knelt, her reflection meeting her eyes. The air around her felt hushed, as if time had paused to listen. The Maya believed that cenotes were offerings from the gods, sources of fresh water in a land where rivers did not run above ground. But more than that, they were sacred. They gave life and received offerings in return. Archaeologists, many years later, would find gifts in their depths: jade, obsidian, pottery, and bones. Signs that people came to these waters not just for thirst, but for prayer, for sacrifice, for speaking with the spirits of the deep. Itzel had heard of the cenote at Chichen Itza, wide as a plaza, where priests would throw offerings into the blue depths. Sometimes, they whispered the names of kings. Sometimes, they asked for rain. Sometimes, they gave more, the ultimate gifts, sent into the silence below. She looked again into the stillness. Then, slowly, she took the carved stone her father had given her, the one with the glyph of Chuck. She held it close to her heart, whispered a thank you, and placed it gently at the edge of the pool. In the world of the Maya, illness was not just a problem of the body. It was a disruption in the balance, a signal from the spirit, the land, the gods. Healing was more than medicine, it was harmony restored. The Maya healers, known as Amen, were not simply doctors. They were guides, between body and soul, between earth and sky. They walked with calm footsteps, spoke with soft voices, and carried with them the memory of plants, prayers, and dreams. Itzel had often watched the village healer, old Na Kin, as she gathered herbs just after dawn. She moved silently through the forest, her hands brushing leaves with reverence. She never took more than she needed, and she always whispered thanks to each plant she picked. "She listens to the plants," Itzel's mother would say. "And they answer." One morning, Itzel followed Na Kin to the edge of the forest, where the mist still clung to the trees and dew sparkled like tiny stars on every leaf. Na Kin knelt before a patch of chaya, a leafy green used for strength and warmth. "This one," she whispered, "gives energy when we are weak. But if we eat it raw, it can harm. It must be cooked. Like words, some must be softened before we offer them." Itzel smiled, and Na Kin placed a few chaya leaves into her basket. Nearby, there was copal, the tree resin burned during rituals, and guava, used for fevers. There was bitter bark for digestion, huevos de iguana seed for pain, and passion flower to calm dreams. The forest was their pharmacy. But healing was more than herbs. When someone fell ill, Na Kin would begin with prayer. She would light a bundle of copal, wave it gently through the air, and speak the names of the gods. She would call upon Nine Chel, goddess of healing and moonlight, to guide her hands and calm the body. She would also ask questions, not only of the sick, but of the family. Had there been an argument? A broken promise? A forgotten offering? Illness could come from imbalance, not just within, but between people, or between the people and the earth. Sometimes, Na Kin performed soul callings. If someone's spirit had wandered, frightened by a dream, a loud sound, a sudden scare, she would guide it back. She would sing quietly, blow sacred smoke across the crown of the head, and use a bundle of leaves to brush away the confusion. Itzel watched one of these healings one afternoon, when a young boy had returned from the forest, pale and quiet. His mother wept softly, but Na Kin remained calm. She whispered to the boy, called to his spirit, and brushed his back with fragrant leaves dipped in spring water. Slowly, his eyes brightened. His breath deepened. His mother smiled through her tears. Sometimes, Na Kin told Itzel afterward, we do not need to cure. We only need to remember. That evening, the healer sat with Itzel beneath the ceiba tree, the sacred tree that held the three worlds together, the heavens above, the earth in the middle, and the underworld below. Fireflies danced among the branches, and the wind whispered songs from far away. You must listen to all things, Na Kin said, her voice barely above a breath. The roots, the stars, the silence. Healing begins with listening. Itzel nodded. She pressed her ear to the earth and imagined she could hear the slow heartbeat of the world. That night, in her dreams, she walked through a garden of glowing plants, each one humming gently, each leaf warm with light. She felt her hands moving without fear, guided by breath, memory, and love. And when she awoke, she whispered a quiet blessing to the morning light, and the day answered with peace. Rising above the treetops, tall and silent, stood the temples of the Maya. These sacred structures were more than stone, they were bridges between worlds. Built by hand, carved with care, and aligned with the stars, each temple was a mountain born from human devotion. In Yaxkin Ha, the village temple was small, a simple stepped pyramid of limestone softened by moss and time. Yet, to Itzel, it was as grand as Tikal or Kalakmul. She would often climb its steps with care, barefoot and quiet, as if walking up a prayer. At the summit was a small room, open to the sky on all sides, where the priest lit copal and whispered to the wind. The scent would drift down the steps like invisible ribbons, curling around the plaza below. Each temple faced with purpose. Some aligned with the rising sun on solstice mornings. Others matched the path of Venus as it returned to the night sky. Nothing was random. Everything had rhythm. Itzel's uncle Ahau Balam once told her, the gods live in the sky, yes, but they listen best when we build with meaning. The Maya temples were filled with glyphs, not only outside but within. Carvings of kings seated on jaguars. Murals of bloodletting ceremonies, where rulers offered their lifeblood to nourish the balance. The walls remembered. But even deeper was the sound. Inside the chambers, voices echoed in strange ways. A whisper could travel from corner to corner like a spirit. Some temples were built so that when drums were played on the steps, the sound would carry like thunder through the forest. One day, as a golden dusk fell over Yaxkin Ha, Itzel sat on the upper steps, watching the sky fade into lavender. She imagined the days when this very temple stood bright with red paint and banners. When kings stood on the platform and called down to the people below. She closed her eyes and listened. Far away, the jungle moved, birds settling, branches sighing. But closer still, the temple seemed to breathe. The stone warm from the day, the wind gentle on her face. She felt the presence of the builders, those who hauled stones by hand, who mixed lime and ash, who carved the glyphs with quiet pride. The Maya did not build to impress. They built to connect. Each step was a climb toward the heavens. Each ceremony performed at the summit was an offering, not of power, but of presence. The people gathered below, eyes turned upward, hearts joined in rhythm. During festivals, dancers would circle the temples, their feet pounding the earth in sync with drums and flutes. The gods were not distant. They were among them, in the music, the firelight, the scent of flowers. Itzel traced the glyphs near the summit with her fingers. One showed the maize god rising from the earth. Another showed a serpent winding through the stars. Another simply read, Kin, sun. That night, she dreamed of a temple so tall it reached into the constellations. She stood at its peak and touched a star, and when she looked down, the world below glowed with soft light, the temples of all Maya cities shimmering like lanterns in the jungle. She woke with dew on her cheeks, and the sun just rising behind the eastern trees. She whispered a small prayer of gratitude and placed a single flower on the temple step, a quiet offering for those who built with purpose, for those who climbed to listen. And high above, the sky waited, listening still. When night fell over the forests of the Maya, it did not bring darkness alone, it brought stories, signals, and sacred time. The sky, to the Maya, was a book written in stars. And their stargazers, the Ajkin, were its quiet readers. Itzel loved these nights most, when the village fires burned low and everyone gathered beneath the open sky. No roofs above them. Only the wide heavens, blinking softly with meaning. Her grandfather, who once studied the stars, would sit with her and point upward with a gentle finger. There, he would whisper. That is the path of the sacred twins. And over there, the black road, Zibalbabi, the Milky Way, where spirits travel. She would follow his hand, her eyes tracing constellations that danced differently than those of other lands. The Maya had their own skies, full of heroes and jaguars, turtles and serpents. Each cluster had a tale. The Maya tracked Venus carefully, it was not just a light in the sky. It was the morning star and the evening star, a god of dual nature. Its rising and setting were timed to wars, rituals, and harvests. When Venus reappeared after a long absence, drums would sound in the plaza, and priests would burn copal to mark its return. Itzel once helped the scribes at the temple paint a new Venus chart. The skywatchers used long wooden instruments to measure angles, standing still for hours, sometimes days. They marked each change, each movement, with quiet concentration, as if listening to a heartbeat in the stars. The Maya understood the movements of the sun and moon so deeply that they predicted eclipses, solstices, and equinoxes. Their calendars were not guesses, they were precise. They used 3 at once, the tsokin, the hob, and the long count. A woven braid of time. Her grandfather explained it to her one quiet night. The tsokin is the sacred cycle, 260 days, like the time it takes for a child to be born. The hob is the year, 365 days, like the sun's journey. And the long count, that is deep time. Time of cities. Time of gods. Each person was born under a day sign, a sacred energy. Itzel's sign was Can, the seed, the spark, the hidden treasure. You are one who will carry light, her grandfather had whispered with pride. On festival nights, the villagers created star maps from maize flour, laying out constellations on the earth. Children would walk among the stars barefoot, pretending to be gods, as the elders told the sky stories, how the maize god was born from the turtle shell in the heavens, or how the hero twins defeated the lords of the underworld and rose into the sky. Even in dreams, the stars were active. Itzel sometimes dreamed she flew between constellations, weaving among bright threads of starlight, passing planets like glowing birds. In one dream, she sat beside a star scribe, who dipped a feather into moonlight and wrote a name on the sky. She awoke with tears in her eyes, the image still fresh, a name written in stars, fading gently with dawn. The Maya didn't fear the night. They studied it, honored it, and found stories in its stillness. They believed that by watching the sky, they understood the gods, because the gods themselves were moving above them, in patterns older than memory. And so, each night, Itzel looked up, not for answers, but for presence. For rhythm. For connection. And the stars blinked back, like old friends, whispering. We remember you too. In the heart of every great Maya city was a ball court, long, stone-lined, echoing with memory. Not just a place for sport, but for sacred ceremony. The ball game, Paktapak, was no ordinary game. It was life. Death. Rebirth. A story played out in motion. In Yakskin Ha, the ball court sat beneath two tall walls, vines curling along the edges. Itzel loved to sit quietly on the upper tier, watching the soft dust glow golden in the morning light. She imagined the players moving like jaguars, focused and silent, as the rubber ball bounced between them, heavy, fast, alive. The rules were ancient. The ball could not be touched with hands or feet. Only hips, elbows, and knees. A single strike could send it flying through the court. Sometimes, a stone ring stood high on the side walls, and passing the ball through it was like threading the sun through a needle. But the game wasn't just for show. It was a ritual echoing the sacred tale of the hero twins. Itzel knew that story by heart. How the twins played ball so loudly in the sky that it disturbed the lords of the underworld. How they were summoned to Zabalba, faced trials, died, and were reborn as the sun and moon. The ball court was a doorway to that other world, a thin place where gods watched. Some matches were ceremonial, part of great festivals. Others marked moments of power, between rival cities or royal heirs. Sometimes, the losing team faced sacrifice. Yet this too was seen as honor, a gift to the gods. The players wore protective gear, thick leather belts, padded collars, and masks of fierce expression. They moved with grace and strength, anticipating the path of the ball like dancers in a storm. Itzel once asked the priestess, "Why do the gods care about a game?" The old woman smiled softly, "Because it teaches us balance. Darkness and light. Rise and fall. No one always wins. No one always loses. But we must play with heart." Children in the village practiced each evening. Itzel watched them laugh and stumble, learning the rhythm. The ball made a hollow sound as it struck stone. Pock. Pock. Like a heartbeat from the past. When the real matches came, the crowd was silent, respectful. Drums beat slowly. Incense swirled. The players bowed before entering. Some courts had sacred glyphs carved into the walls, scenes of warriors, serpents, and stars. One image showed a player with a ball in his hip striking down a skeletal god. Another showed a king standing tall beside the ring, one hand raised to the heavens. Sometimes, Itzel would dream of playing. She'd feel the weight of the belt, the sting of the ball, the rush of movement. In her dream, she was both warrior and storyteller, moving through history with every strike. The Maya believed that everything must be balanced, day with night, sky with earth, breath with stillness. The ball game was a way of restoring harmony. A sacred performance in the court between worlds. As the sun dipped low one evening, casting long shadows across the court, Itzel traced her fingers along the carvings on the wall. She whispered a prayer, not for victory, but for balance. For the memory of those who played with courage. For the spirits who still walked the lines of the court. For the sound of the ball echoing into the stars. And somewhere in the quiet, she heard it. Pock. Pock. Like time itself, bouncing back into the present. Before there were books made of leather and cloth, before the sound of printing presses, there were scribes. The quiet artists of the Maya world. Keepers of stories, counters of stars, and guardians of memory. In the calm shadows of Yaxkin-Ha's temple school, young scribes bent over their work. Itzel often visited that quiet space, where time seemed to soften and settle. The smell of ink made from soot and berries hung in the air, and the rustle of pages made from amati bark filled the silence. She watched as careful hands painted with brushes made of animal hair, lines, curves, and dots forming glyphs of immense beauty and meaning. Each symbol wasn't just a word, it was a spirit. A breath. A song captured in shape. The Maya writing system was complex, over 800 glyphs, some representing full words, others sounds, all alive with intention. Scribes trained for years. They learned to draw the god glyphs with reverence and to record kings' births, wars, festivals, and eclipses with precision. One elder scribe, named Amun, took a liking to Itzel. He would show her faded codices, whispering their meaning softly. "This," he murmured, pointing to a swirling glyph, "is for Cenote. A youth. Like you." "And this?" she asked, tracing a symbol shaped like a coiled snake. "That is Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. He who connects earth to sky." Their books were folded like accordions, long strips of bark paper coated in white lime, then filled with inked dreams. Each codex was sacred. Not many survived the centuries, but in Itzel's time, they were plentiful and cherished. Scribes didn't only write history, they wrote time. Calendars and prophecy scrolls, burial records and astronomy charts. They were the sole memory of the Maya world. Without them, nothing stayed. Sometimes, Amun would let Itzel try a brush. She dipped it into a small shell filled with black ink and carefully shaped a single glyph, Ik, for wind, breath, the invisible life between things. She smiled. Ik, she whispered. The wind is always here, even when we don't see it. Amun nodded. Just like stories. Just like the gods. Scribes sat beside kings in court. They recorded births with joy and sacrifices with solemnity. On Stelian walls, their glyphs told the rise and fall of rulers, the turning of seasons, and the deeds that must never be forgotten. Every city had its scribes. In wars, capturing enemy scribes was seen as powerful, for in taking them, you claimed their past, too. Itzel learned to see stories everywhere, not just in codices, but in temple walls, in pottery, even in carved bone. The Maya etched beauty into everything. She once held a tiny shell, and inside it, someone had painted a single glyph in red, Kain, sun. Light in the smallest space. At night, she dreamed of pages that fluttered like birds, carrying messages between stars and roots. She dreamed of writing her own codex one day, filled with the quiet tales of those who lived in the spaces between kings and battles, the potters, the midwives, the singers, the dreamers. And when she awoke, the air felt full of whispers. Not ghosts, but words waiting to be remembered. To be written. To be shared. To be loved. At dawn, when the mist rolled in from the jungle, the temples of Yaxkin-Ha appeared like great mountain spirits, rising from the trees. Their stone faces were calm, eternal, gazing toward the rising sun. Temples were not just buildings. They were sacred hearts of Maya cities, living mountains where gods descended and the world connected sky to earth. Some were small, with just a few steep steps. Others rose high, crowned with roof combs and carved masks that watched over the people. Itzel would climb them slowly, barefoot and quiet. With each step, she felt the presence of those who had climbed before, priests, kings, dancers, and pilgrims. The air grew thinner near the top, but the view widened, revealing a sea of green and stone. The tallest temple in Yaxkin-Ha was dedicated to the sun god, Kinichahau. Its eastern steps caught the first light each morning. On solstices, the sun rose exactly through the temple's doorway, like a golden eye opening to bless the earth. Inside, the air was cool, still, and filled with echoes. Walls were painted with red, yellow, and blue, swirling serpents, divine hands, celestial paths. Offerings rested at the base of the altar, cacao beans, feathers, jade beads, and flowers. Priests burned copal resin in stone bowls, filling the chamber with sweet, thick smoke. Itzel would sit near the doorway, letting the scent wrap around her. The flicker of torches made the painted gods seem to move, to breathe. Temples were calendars, too. Their shadows marked seasons. Their doorways aligned with stars. The Maya built them with knowledge, intention, and reverence. Sometimes, Itzel would close her eyes and imagine how it once was. The plaza below full of people, music echoing between the stone. Priests in tall feathered headdresses chanting in deep, steady rhythm. The king emerging from the temple's top to offer blessings. She could feel the drums, the heartbeat of stone. There were stories of temples far to the west, in cities swallowed by jungle. Some said they were so tall, their tops touched the clouds. Others told of secret chambers filled with scrolls, crystal skulls, and echoes of old gods. One night, under a sky full of stars, Itzel asked her grandmother, "Do the temples speak?" Her grandmother smiled and nodded, "They whisper through time. If you listen with your heart, you'll hear their stories." So Itzel listened. To the moss growing on stone. To the rain that slid down the ancient carvings. To the wind that passed through temple windows like a breath from the divine. She dreamed of walking those temples in her dreams, feet never touching the steps, only gliding. She passed through stone and time, learning the names of gods, the secrets of balance, the meaning of light falling perfectly into shadow. And when the mist returned, she would sit at the base of the steps, eyes soft, heart full. Knowing that in silence, the temples still spoke. Beyond the temples and markets of Yaxkin Ha, there was a court made of smooth stone, sunken between sloped walls, and lined with carvings of jaguars, serpents, and gods. This was the ball court, a sacred space of play, ritual, and power. To a passerby, it may have seemed like a sport. But for the Maya, the Paktapak ball game was something far deeper. It was cosmic drama played out on Earth, a reenactment of the eternal struggle between light and darkness, between life and the underworld. Itzel would sit quietly in the shaded edge of the court, legs crossed, watching the players train. Their bodies were strong, covered in padding of woven fibers and leather. They moved with a rhythm both fierce and graceful. The ball, heavy and made of solid rubber, bounced with a dull thud that echoed between the walls like a drumbeat from the gods. The goal was to keep the ball in motion using only hips, elbows, and knees. In some matches, players aimed to pass the ball through stone hoops mounted high on the walls. Success was rare and sacred. Itzel remembered the stories. That the hero twins, Hunapu and Zbalank, once played this very game against the lords of the underworld in Zabalba. Through cleverness, courage, and grace, they defeated death itself. That is why the ball game mattered, it mirrored the myth, the hope, the resilience. During great festivals, the ball game drew crowds from every corner of the city. Drums pulsed like heartbeats. Shell horns cried into the sky. The scent of roasted maize and incense hung in the warm air. Nobles and priests watched from shaded platforms. The people murmured prayers for their champions. Some games were friendly, joyful, a test of skill and agility. Others, more solemn. For in the most sacred of matches, the stakes were high. Captives might play for their lives. Victors, or the most honored among them, could even be chosen for sacrifice, to become one with the gods in a blaze of glory. Itzel found beauty in the motion. The way the players flowed like water and struck like jaguars. Their focus was pure. Their silence, deep. Even their falls seemed choreographed by the stars. One player, a young man named Balaam, trained each morning before the sun rose. Itzel once asked him, "Why do you play when no one watches?" He smiled gently, "Because the gods always watch. The sun watches. And the ancestors beneath the court, they remember. She began waking early to join him in silence, sitting with her eyes closed, listening to the rhythm of the ball, the hush of his breath, the beat of devotion. In time, she learned to feel the echo, not just hear it, that ancient vibration traveling through the stone, the memory of every match played, every life honored, every soul tested. The court was more than a field, it was an altar. A place where heaven and underworld met. Even now, when the moon is high and the jungle quiet, you might feel the thud of the ball. Hear the crowd's ghostly cheer. Smell the smoke. Feel the thrill. Echoes of glory never fade. At night, when the fires were dim and the jungle hushed to a hush, the skies over Yaxkin Ha would stretch wide with stars. They shimmered like sequins sewn into the velvet darkness, moving slowly, steadily, like ancient guardians. The Maya were stargazers. Watchers. Dreamers of celestial rhythm. Itzel would lie on a woven mat, chin in her hands, eyes tracing constellations. Beside her, the elders murmured stories of the stars, not as distant balls of light, but as divine spirits, gods with names and purposes, navigating the heavens in sacred patterns. Venus was the morning star and evening star, and the Maya called it Chukek. It wasn't just a light in the sky, it was a powerful omen. When Venus rose, wars were timed, rulers consulted the stars, and ceremonies lit the night with sacred flames. The sun, of course, was a god of radiant strength, Kinichahau, who rode across the sky in a golden canoe each day. The moon, pale and gentle, was a goddess who wept silver light over sleeping cities. But Itzel's favorite was the Milky Way, which the elders called Zabalbabi, the Black Road, the path to the underworld. They said the spirits of the dead walked along its river of light, guided by the breath of the gods. Her grandmother had once been a sky priestess, an Ajkin, reader of the stars. She taught Itzel how to follow the movements of the sun across the horizon, to notice how certain stars returned with the seasons, how eclipses were not omens of doom, but moments of balance. They would rise before dawn together, standing barefoot in the dewy grass, watching Venus blaze low on the horizon. There, her grandmother would whisper, pointing with a thin, wise finger, "That is the breath of tomorrow." In Yaxkin Ha, great stone observatories rose among the temples. Circular towers with narrow windows that aligned perfectly with the rising of the sun during solstices and equinoxes. Through these portals, the Maya measured time, foretold rains, guided planting, and wove the calendar that ordered all life. Their knowledge was not just clever, it was sacred. They recorded it in bark paper codices, folded like accordions, filled with glyphs and symbols. Priests carried them carefully, and only the most learned could read their meanings. They spoke of eclipses, moon cycles, seasons of maize, and the return of gods. One evening, Itzel dreamed she floated among the stars, her body light as air. She passed planets like lanterns, danced with the moon, and bathed in the warm glow of the sun. She looked down and saw Yaxkin Ha shining like a firefly in the green night. When she woke, she asked her grandmother, "Do the stars know our names?" Her grandmother smiled with soft eyes, "They do. And they sing them every night." And so, Itzel watched the skies, listened to their lullabies, and learned to read their ancient light. The stars became her friends, constant, watchful, kind. Even now, if you close your eyes and listen, you might hear the soft whisper of a star calling your name. A reminder that you are part of something vast, beautiful, and eternal. In the shaded edge of the city, where the stone roads met the jungle, lived those who walked between body and spirit, the healers. Known as Aj-men, they were guides of health, dreams, and mystery. Itzel often watched them pass, carrying bundles of herbs wrapped in palm leaves, their tunics decorated with shells and feathers, their eyes calm, like still pools. These were not ordinary people. The Aj-men were chosen, often from childhood, trained by elders in the secret knowledge of plants, chants, rituals, and the delicate balance between life and death. Their work was sacred, not only to heal, but to protect the soul. One healer, old and soft-spoken, was called Ninth Sunan, the hummingbird lady. She moved like her namesake, quiet and fast, with bright eyes that missed nothing. When Itzel was very young and once sick with fever, her family had brought her to Ninth Sunan. She had prepared a bath of fragrant leaves, copal, chaya, and balch, and sang in a voice that fluttered like wings. The healing wasn't only in the medicine, but in the presence, the breath, the prayer. Years later, Itzel would return often just to watch and listen. To learn. Ninth Sunan taught her how to grind the bark of the ceiba tree to treat wounds. How to use the white sap of guarumo for stomach pains. And how dreams could hold messages from the gods, signs of what was wounded not in the flesh, but in the soul. The forest was their pharmacy. It held answers, if one knew how to ask gently. The AJ men burned copal resin to cleanse homes, used obsidian blades to draw illness from the skin, and called upon the spirit of the jaguar to give strength to the weak. Every act had a rhythm, a whisper of wind, a hum of song, a deep silence between words. In times of drought, they led ceremonies to speak with the rain gods. In moments of grief, they lit candles to guide the dead across the black waters to Xibalba. Itzel's favorite was the ritual of balch, where the sacred drink brewed from tree bark and honey was shared in circle, and the community spoke their worries, their hopes, their dreams. Under the stars, people wept, laughed, healed together. These were not only ceremonies, they were mirrors. Ways for the people to see themselves whole again. The healer's home was filled with drying herbs, painted stones, clay jars, and carved talismans. The air always smelled of warmth and wood smoke. There was no fear there. Only calm. Itzel, Ninth Sunan once told her as they crushed herbs under a grinding stone, a true healer does not cure. A true healer reminds the body how to sing again. And so Itzel listened, learned, and kept a journal of leaves and roots, of dreams and winds. Even as she grew older, she knew that every time she heard the flap of a hummingbird's wings, Ixed Sunan was near, reminding her that healing is a quiet, sacred whisper passed from one soul to another. Even now, as night falls and crickets sing their lullaby, the spirits of the forest watch and wait, ready to guide us back into balance. In the heart of every great Maya city, surrounded by steep staircases and carvings of gods, was a sacred place, the ball court. Long, narrow, and lined with stone walls that echoed every movement, it was no ordinary sport that took place here. This was Paktapak, the sacred ball game, a ritual older than memory, a contest of cosmic balance. Itzel first saw the game from the edge of the stands, clutching her father's cloak. She remembered the tension in the air, not the shouting of crowds, but a deep, reverent silence, like at the beginning of a storm. The players wore heavy belts and padded gear. They moved with focused grace, like jaguars in slow motion. The rubber ball, heavy and hard, was passed back and forth not with hands or feet, but with hips, elbows, and shoulders. Each thud echoed through the stone corridor, bouncing off sacred walls decorated with carvings of skulls, snakes, and gods. The stakes of this game were not wealth or pride, but cosmic balance. To the Maya, Paktapak represented the eternal struggle between the forces of light and darkness, life and death. Each game was a reenactment of the hero twins' journey into the underworld, Xibalba, where they played against the lords of death. When Itzel was older, her uncle, a player once, whispered that the ball was more than a sphere. It was the sun, reborn with every bounce, passed through the hoop as if through the mouth of time. To score a point, to pass the ball through the vertical stone hoop mounted high on the court wall, was a moment of glory, as rare as lightning in winter. The crowd would gasp, then fall silent again, offering their awe to the gods. But the ball court was not only for games. It was a place of decisions. Treaties were sealed here. Disputes ended in symbolic matches. Sometimes, a losing team, or the winning captain, would offer themselves as sacrifice, a sacred duty, a gift to the gods. Itzel once watched a ceremony at the end of a grand match. The players, drenched in sweat and honor, knelt in a circle. The priest marked each forehead with red paint, the color of the rising sun. Then a moment of stillness. A hush-like breath held in stone. Sacrifice, to the Maya, was not horror. It was transformation. The soul returned to the gods, not in pain, but in power. In the cool shadows of the ball court, Itzel later traced the carvings of the hero twins. Their story was one of cleverness, of bravery, of light defying darkness. She whispered their names like a prayer, Hunapu and Zbalank, and wondered if they watched every match still. The ball court remained sacred even when empty. Children did not play there casually. People passed with lowered voices. Birds flew silently over its stone. Some said you could hear the echoes of old games if you pressed your ear to the walls, the slap of the ball, the call of the gods, the hush of fate. And even now, if you listen closely. Somewhere in the whispering night, the ball bounces once again. Calling us to remember the dance of shadow and sun, the balance of life and spirit. It was on the highest platform of the Great Pyramid that Itzel first felt the sky speak. She had climbed the narrow steps before dawn, the chill of the morning clinging to her cloak. Around her, the city slept, still wrapped in the hush of darkness. Only the stars kept watch, a scatter of shimmering lights that danced with intention. The Maya watched the heavens not just for beauty, but for meaning. Their priests were astronomers, mathematicians, and dreamers all at once. They charted the motions of Venus, the moon, the sun, and the great constellations. With careful observation and deep reflection, they crafted one of the most precise calendar systems the world has ever known. Itzel remembered the 3 calendars. The Tzolk'in, the sacred 260-day calendar, guided spiritual ceremonies, days of destiny, and the rhythm of the gods. Every day held a unique energy, marked by a number and a glyph, like a divine fingerprint. Then there was the Hab, the solar calendar of 365 days. Shaped by seasons, planting, and the turning of the earth. Itzel's family knew which day to sow maize, which day to harvest honey, by its count. And beyond them both, the long count. A grand cycle of time that recorded thousands of years, reaching back to the birth of the current world age. These calendars did not simply measure time. They wove time into story. On this temple summit, Itzel watched the sunrise strike the stone, just as the priests had predicted. The rays fell precisely through the carved doorway, illuminating the central altar. It was not coincidence. It was architecture guided by stars. The Great Pyramid itself was a calendar. With 91 steps on each of its 4 sides, and the platform on top, it totaled 365, one for each day of the solar year. On the equinox, shadows of the setting sun traced the image of a serpent slithering down the side, the return of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god. Itzel whispered thanks as the sunlight touched her skin. The Maya believed time was not a line, but a circle. Every moment returned. Every ending a new beginning. And so, the turning of the calendar was not just a date, it was a moment of reflection, of ceremony. Families gathered to honor ancestors, offer kopal, and tell the stories that tied them to the sky. Priests would fast, climb the observatories, and read the heavens for signs, eclipses, conjunctions, omens. They would consult codices, folding books of bark paper, filled with symbols, colors, and time. To the Maya, time was sacred, alive, and deeply personal. Every person was born under a sign, given a destiny. Every village lived within cycles, bound to the heartbeats of stars. Itzel sometimes imagined time as a great spiral staircase within the pyramid, turning ever upward, connecting the earth below to the heavens above. Tonight, she lay beneath the stars, listening to their slow language. Above her, the sky pulsed with stories. Below, the stones remembered. And in between, in the soft breath of night, Itzel dreamed of time not as something to chase, but something to walk with, hand in hand, toward eternity. The moon was full over the city once known as Yak's Mutal, and Itzel walked its empty plazas in a dream, or perhaps in memory. The great temples stood tall, their staircases worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The jungle hummed gently around them, vines cradling the stone like soft blankets. She passed the carved stelae that marked rulers' long return to the earth. Their faces, frozen in time, still gazed toward the horizon, as if awaiting something just beyond. The city was quiet, but not lifeless. For the Maya believed that nothing truly ended. The spirit did not vanish, it transformed. The breath of ancestors lingered in the ceiba trees, in the sacred cenotes, in the wind that whispered across the stones. Itzel reached the temple of the inscriptions, its glyphs glowing silver under the moonlight. Each symbol told a story, births, battles, ceremonies, stars. But this was not history as we know it, dry and dusty, no, this was living memory. To the Maya, the past was alive. Stories were not just told, they were honored. The city was not a ruin, but a soul in meditation. Itzel sat beneath the great tree at the center of the plaza, the sacred ceiba, whose roots reached down into the underworld, whose trunk connected the earth, and whose branches touched the heavens. She closed her eyes. She heard the music of flutes and drums echo faintly. The laughter of children, the songs of priests, the rhythm of stonemasons shaping temples for gods. Everything still existed, in the folds of time. The Maya world was never lost, only quiet. Even as cities fell into silence, the people endured. In mountain villages, rainforest valleys, and coastal paths, the Maya spirit lived on. They farmed, prayed, wove, and remembered. Their wisdom flowed in patterns of textiles, the taste of tamales, the tilt of the stars. The language of their ancestors still danced on tongues, whispered between generations. Itzel's heart felt full with this knowing. In the stillness, she finally understood. To remember is to keep alive. To whisper their names is to wake them gently. And so, as the night deepens, and sleep reaches out its gentle hands, let us leave this dreaming city not with sorrow, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the time we shared with Itzel, with her people. Gratitude for the stars above that still shine over ancient stones. Gratitude for the stories that carry us softly, gently, into rest. Close your eyes now. Let the echoes fade. Let the jungle hum soothe your thoughts. Let the breath of the Maya lull you into dreams.